welcome back everyone. It's been a long 3 months, but I'm finally glad to be moving forward again. It is unfortunate that we won't be meeting in person, but as I know there are many of you who have travel and work and other commitments, recorded lectures seemed to be the best option to make sure that everyone is able to finish the course with the least amount of stress. So the remaining 3 lectures in the course integrate concepts that we covered in the first half before the midterm. So you might find it helpful to review your notes from the material that we covered before the strike, just to refresh your memory, since it has been 3 months now. I've broken up each lecture into a few separate videos, and I'm also going to provide you the lecture slides separately so you don't need to listen to me every time you want to review them. The first topic that we're going to cover is island biogeography. And this is one of the most important concepts in biogeography, and it's sometimes referred to as the single unifying theory of biogeography. So this video is the first in a series of 3 videos, and it's going to focus on how islands form, so islands more generally. And the way that an island forms is very important for understanding the diversity and the types of species you would then find on that island. But before I get started, I wanted to pose a question to you. So do you think this statement is true or false? I'm obviously going to tell you the answer over the course of the next couple videos, but I do want you to think about it on your own at first. So I would recommend pausing the video here, thinking about this statement. So do you think that islands would have a smaller number of species compared to an equivalent mainland area? Or do you think the opposite would be true? An island would have more species than the equivalent mainland area. And why or why not? Why do you think this might be the case? So then you can see how correct your assumptions are later on as we start to answer this question directly. So to give a quick recap of what we covered before the strike, biogeography looks at 4 fundamental processes: dispersal, colonization, extinction, and evolution. And we covered each one of these in the first half of the course. So dispersal, the movement of organisms from a point of origin to a new location. So we would talk about concepts related to dispersal limitation. The idea that some types of species are better adapted to long-range dispersal than other, birds being a good example. A bird is going to be able to disperse much easier than a land animal. You know, a bird is not going to be necessarily hindered by a body of water like a land animal might. Colonization. So it's not just enough for an organism to reach a new location. It has to be able to establish a population. So it has to be able to survive and reproduce. So dispersal isn't always successful, and the traits that make species good dispersers doesn't always make them good colonizers. So extinction. Extinction is when a species is eliminated from a particular area. And it's, you can talk about local extinction, so you just lose that species from a particular area. Or you can talk about global extinction, where that species goes extinct over its entire range. And there are certain traits or characteristics that make a species or a population more likely to go extinct. Evolution. So this concept is fundamental to the early development of biogeography. So the earliest biogeographers, Carl Linnaeus being one of the more famous ones, firmly believed that species do not change over time. But of course we now know that species do change over time through the process of evolution. And recall also that evolution does not have to include speciation, though it often does. So change can occur within a species, within populations as well, and that would also fall under the broader category of evolution. And islands are really the perfect laboratory to study these 4 fundamental processes. So they're relatively simple, easily defined units. So it's very easy to draw a border around an island. That might be a little bit more difficult when you were looking at a continental scale, for example. So how do you draw a border around the biogeography of Toronto, for example? Do you draw the border around a forest, around a province? An island, it is very simple to know, easy to know where the borders are. And most importantly, islands are isolated, and you need isolation for speciation to occur. And this is why a lot of the theories related to evolution were actually developed by looking at island chains. So with this in mind, it's unsurprising that biogeographers have been studying islands for such a long time. Both Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace, two key figures in the development of the theory of evolution by natural selection, conducted much of their natural history research on oceanic islands. So Darwin famously worked on the Galapagos Islands. The Hawaiian archipelago has also been a very important area of research for developing biogeographic theories. So, of course, one of the most famous islands in not just the field of biogeography, but ecology and evolution more generally, are the Galapagos Islands. So this is a series of islands located off the coast of Ecuador. And it was the unique species diversity that Darwin witnessed there, particularly noticing subtle differences in species and species traits between these different islands in the Galapagos, that led him to later develop his theories on evolution by natural selection. So upon leaving the Galapagos in 1835, he wrote, "If there is the slightest foundation for these remarks, the zoology of the archipelagos will be well worth examining, for such facts would undermine the stability of species." So again, when Darwin was working, there was still this strong belief for many of his contemporaries that species do not change over time. Species are immutable. And of course, Darwin is one of the most famous for eventually doing away with this idea of the stability of species. Now, as I alluded to at the beginning of this lecture, islands can form in a few different ways. And the way that an island formed influences the diversity and the types of species that you're likely to find on that island. So here, once again, you see evidence for how biogeography is strongly influenced by the study of geology or Earth system science. So there are three main types of islands. And the first type of island are islands that were originally part of a nearby continent. So they were part of the continent and became separated from the continent by a vicarious event. So this could have been caused by rising sea levels. For example, this is how Newfoundland formed, or the British Isles. Or they can become separated from the continent by tectonic processes. So Madagascar, which we talked about before the strike, Madagascar is an example of an island forming by tectonic processes. So let's review again the case study of Madagascar. So on continental islands, the types of species that you're likely to find on that island would have been the result of both a vicarious event and dispersal. So Madagascar we covered in the first half of the term. It was also a question on your midterm. And many of Madagascar's unique species have close relatives on the continent of Africa. And this makes sense when you look at a present-day map of Madagascar, and you see that it is currently located very close to the coast of Africa. So there is an ocean separating Madagascar from Africa, but it's still close enough that dispersal can occur. So what might be more surprising is the number of living and extinct species on Madagascar that Madagascar currently shares with India. So it's currently not located close to India, and yet despite this distance from India, it does share a number of its species with India. And this is because for most of its geological history, Madagascar was actually attached to or much closer to India than it was to Africa. So these land masses were attached 100 million years ago and then started moving apart with the movement of the Earth's crustal plates. So in Madagascar, many of its older species lineages are or share ancestors with species found in India. And these species evolved following a vicarious event, so when the land masses were split. Its younger lineages share ancestors with species found in Africa, and these species arrived in Madagascar by dispersal. So contrast this with the next two types of islands that I'm going to talk about, so islands that were formed by volcanic processes. So volcanic islands formed as islands. They were never attached to the mainland. This means that all of the species that you would find on a volcanic island could only have arrived there by dispersal, unlike continental islands where you could have species that arose by vicarious processes as well. So there are two main types of volcanic islands. So we have volcanic island arcs, which form when the oceanic crust subducts beneath another oceanic crust on an adjacent plate. So again, this is tectonic processes being very important to the formation of islands in general. So let's look at what that looks like. Now this might take some time for you to wrap your head around, particularly if you don't have much of a background in physical geography or geology. But there are many good educational videos on YouTube that can help you understand this process, and I've linked to one of them here. But recall again that the Earth is broken up into tectonic plates, and these plates are continuously moving. So areas where tectonic plates collide tend to be hotspots for earthquakes and volcanic activity. So when an ocean crustal plate subducts beneath another ocean crustal plate, you have a hotspot of volcanic activity, which results in the creation of a chain of volcanic islands. And the Aleutian Islands and the Philippines are both island arcs that formed by this process. The second type of volcanic island are islands that form over hotspots. So instead of an arc of islands that form parallel to an ocean trench, you have a volcanic island that forms over a hotspot. So you have a plume of lava rising to the surface, cooling to form an island in the ocean, and these can be submerged, or the larger ones can rise above the surface to form a landmass. So you have an island that forms over a hotspot, and again they're located on tectonic plates that are constantly moving. So the tectonic plate moves, and gradually that island moves off of that hotspot. And then you have a new island that's going to form over that hotspot. So this is how the Galapagos Islands formed and continue to form. So again, if we look at that process visually, in this graphic here on the left, you have your hotspot forming Island 1, and the tectonic plate is moving continuously to the right. So Island 1 will eventually move off the hotspot. It will no longer be volcanically active. And a new island, Island 2, is going to form. Same thing, this plate is continuously moving towards the right. Island 2 will move off the hotspot, and a third island will form, and then a fourth, and so on and so forth. And this is how an archipelago forms. So in the case of the Galapagos Islands, so the Galapagos Islands form over a hotspot. The Galapagos Islands are located on the Nazca Plate. And the Nazca Plate is moving towards the South American continent. So the closer an island is to the mainland, the older that island is, and the less volcanically active it is. Erosion is gradually acting on the islands as they move away from the hotspot towards the mainland, and eventually the islands will one day disappear beneath the ocean as they're eroded away. So looking at this map of the Galapagos Islands, draw your attention to San Cristobal Island here. So this island is 4 million years old, and it's one of the ones that's closest to the South American continent. Contrast that with Fernandina, which is one of the youngest islands, 700,000 years old, and highly volcanically active, so one of the most active volcanoes in the world. And older islands have now been located under the ocean between the Galapagos Island and the mainland. So again, we have two very interesting features involved in the formation of the Galapagos Island that make it so interesting for studying the biogeography of species. So first and foremost, these islands formed as islands. They were never attached to the mainland, so there's always been an ocean barrier to the dispersal of species. And the second feature is that you have an age gradient. So some islands are much older than others. So 4 million years versus 700,000 years. So that's a much longer history to accumulate species diversity, a longer history for evolution and speciation to occur. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about the processes of dispersal, colonization, and evolution on islands. But again, what I want you to take from this video is the importance of understanding an island's geological history for interpreting its present day and past biogeography. So the way that an island formed influences where its colonists came from. So most importantly, did the species on that island have to cross the ocean in order to get there? So in the case of a volcanic island, yes, they do have to cross the ocean. In the case of a continental island, not necessarily.